The COVID-19 pandemic is not only a medical crisis but a psychological one. Along with the collective injury, stress, and sadness comes collective loss and sorrow. These losses can shake our senses of self to a great extent. Many of us will have to cope with the loss of loved ones in the midst of this pandemic. Many are also grouping their sense of safety, of social connections, of financial security, losing a job, not having a graduation ceremony, not being able to attend a funeral. All are losses to be grieved, but what we are experiencing now is a living loss. And as we move forward, people will continue to experience losses we can't predict yet. Psychologists say that in addition to grieving for what is now missing from our life, we may also grieve for the ways in which those losses affect our senses of self and personal identity. You are defined by your social interactions. When you're quarantined at home, it helps to name and claim our grief. People often have a vague sense of anxiety or suffering, but putting words to those losses can help them identify ways to move forward. When we are grieving a profound loss, we often say we are heartbroken, but it might be more accurate to call it brain broken, given the role the brain plays in grief. You might feel numb, depressed, or foggy, but moving through the stages of grief, it is natural and healthy. It helps you to process your loss and begin to move forward. And the months afterwards, you mourn the loss of someone meaningful, which functions as a stressor triggering. The pituitary gland at the base of the brain produces adrenocortical trophin, which sends a signal to the adrenal gland to release cortisone, a stress hormone. Unlike temporary threat, upon revisiting grief, may cause your body to flood with cortisol that can cause your immune system to falter, making you feel run down. This is likely why some bereaved spouses fall ill soon after their partner dies. Even if the death of your loved one was expected, the actual event can still feel like a shock to the system. In the short term, a traumatized brain is a bottom-heavy, meaning primitive areas, including the fear center, overactive, adding to the feelings of stress and despair. Meanwhile, higher cortical areas of the brain are underactive, like the anterior cingulate cortex, which helps regulate emotion. You may find it difficult to get over minor annoyances, which lead to increased heart rate for several minutes after you startled. However, over time, the initial shock of the loss typically gives way to deep sadness or depression. As you continue, more depression can cause widespread changes across several parts of the brain, including the amygdala, which regulates sleep behavior and mood, and the hippocampus, which processes memory and regulates stress hormones. These changes disrupt the core functioning of our bodies and minds. As you grieve, you may find yourself sleeping too little or too much, forgetting things, or trapped in a brain fog. Grief is a complicated and a very powerful emotion, and unfortunately, it's very likely that at some points in your life you go through it. I mean, everyone goes through a state of grieving at some point in their life, and there's different theories about how we process our grief. The stages of grief are exactly the same for each person. Some people go from one to another quickly, or you may skip a stage here and there depending on your circumstance, and others may get stuck on a single stage of grief and have difficulty moving on. Knowing these universal stages of grief, knowing what to expect, can really help you deal with your emotions. And you're faced with your own personal loss and grief, it helps enormously to know what's going on. So let's talk about the first stage of grief, shock and denial. This is the first reaction most people have when hearing the news of a devastating loss, and in a frozen disbelief, a denial may follow. If someone brings the news to you that someone very close to you has passed, it's very likely you're going to react with a shock. Your mind is simply not able to process the horror, and it's protecting you by completely denying the reality. You might decide to believe that someone's making a practical joke in some class here, or you might even laugh when you hear the news, the way a child laughs in the dark to dispel the fear. Numbness may follow. It's nature's way of letting you know and dealing with your emotions that you're incapable of handling. Denial is a very helpful stage in grief, but at some point you'll be ready to face the reality, which means a range of very painful emotions that are going to follow. There's no rule how long you should be in denial. There's no rule that everyone has to go through denial. You may be able to just straight jump into high emotional stages such as anger or guilt. But if you persist in denying the reality of your loss, you do need help, and the help can come from a very close friend, relative who knows you, or sometimes even trained therapists or grief counselors may be necessary. You need to accept that the loss is a part of life, and the pain that comes with the loss will slowly pass, and the love will remain for you, and you will always have the memories you need to let yourself continue to grieve in order to achieve acceptance, which is the final stage of soul, which the soul has to achieve, and then only the life can truly go on. The next stage is pain and guilt. Once you get out of this denial phase, the pain's gonna hit you with a full blast, and it might feel overwhelming at times. It will be very tempting during the stage to try to dull the pain with drugs or alcohol. This feeling of guilt is very common during this stage, which may come from unresolved issues. It can be guilt of surviving a loved one, especially the loss you experience, or for the loss of someone younger. You might feel guilty for not showing your love while you could, or showing proper appreciation. Excruciating pain experienced during the stage may lead to anxiety if you're an emotional person. And while the feeling of guilt will pass once you're able to think rationally, the pain will remain, and it will be a part of your life throughout the grieving process. Unfortunately, beyond but slow will be able to function and live with your pain and the reality of your loss and move on. The next stage is anger and bargaining. Your overwhelming pain takes many forms, and it's common that people feel a powerful feeling of anger. This could be anger against doctors who couldn't do any more, or against relatives who did not give more time to you, against God, against destiny, and you may ask questions like how and why me? How could this happen to such a nice person? Anger is healthy after the destructive feeling of guilt in a previous stage of grieving, whose pain leaves you without an anchor. You totally feel out of control in your life. Anger puts you back in control. We were trained to control anger from very early age, and anger gives you a practical outlet to your devastating pain. It's very important not to vent your anger to those who are closest to you. They're also grieving. You've lost enough already. The stages of grief do not follow each other in same order for all people. Anger can easily combine with guilt and turn on you. Even when you lash out at others, deep down you might feel that you failed your loved one in some way. If someone you love is terminally ill, you might try bargaining, or you might try to bargain with God or with destiny. One might promise to be a better person, or stop smoking, or to be more generous. Bargaining is a particularly powerful stage for people who have been diagnosed with terminal illness, and bargaining for your own life can offer hope or a channel of pain that gives you more control. It's important to look for signs of uncontrolled anger, which can irreparably damage your relationships with those closest to you and dearest to you. The next stage is depression and loneliness. All the powerful emotions that follow denial are exhausting, but they represent hope. Strong emotions are one way your pain shows its ugly face, but at some point the hope fades and you face the reality, and the reality is devastating. The loved one is really gone, and there's no way to change that fact that life will never be the same. You were left alone. I know that's upsetting to hear. You might feel that life makes no sense anymore. At some point you can start noticing that life does go on, and the depression will slowly start to lift. That pain will remain, but with less intensity and with less hopelessness. Look for professional help in regards to how long you should wait and allow the depression to wash over you. Days, weeks, and depends on your personality, the enormity of your loss, the support you have from those you love. You need to rejoin life, and don't forget that it will be better in time. Finally, fifth stage. It is the fifth stage, that is acceptance. This is the goal, this is the end game. Here, accepting your loss does not come in a moment of epiphany. It does not work like that. It's a slow, painful process. And it is the result of all the stages of grief that you've gone through. It is a new form your pain takes. But understand, accepting a loss doesn't mean that you're through with it. It just means that you're accepting the death as a part of your own life, on the ashes of which you will build the life that will celebrate the loved one you lost. And now, more than ever, will be the times of the months and even years after loss when you will revert to the one of the stages of griefs for a moment or two, and or maybe even a little longer. But there will be beautiful reminders which drag you back into the depths of your despairs. But they will be rare, and you will be strong enough to deal with them. At that point, holidays may seem painful for you because they can remind you how it looked in a point when you celebrated them with the person you lost. But the stages of grief prepare you for this and will allow you to deal with this loss in your own way. And you know this is really the beginning of the understanding of your loss in a grief. And it is a step-by-step process to overcome your grief, to move on to a more positive mindset, one where you can enjoy life and love again, and be happy and smile again.